Wow.
Forget it.
Wow. Well, you know, I used to be a golfer. In fact, I was a golf addict. So I have to do two things with this trophy.
Okay.
Oh my God, it's heavy.
We'll put it over here.
No. I have to do two things. I have to kiss it. And this is going to be hard because I'm 72 now. Thank you. I thought I was prepared to give remarks here. I was surprised at how much time they've allotted for me. For some reason, I don't always have folk that like to line up to talk before or after me, so I've got to be kind of careful. But I've got a problem. How many went to the little reception that was upstairs here before the thing? You know, I'm 72 years old now, and I've found that the give a shit factor goes way, way down. And because it goes way, way down, you have the freedom, especially since you move to America, which is North Idaho. And I met a bunch of folks at that reception, and also here at the head table, that are, I thought had retired, and they're still working. So I even met a couple lawyers up there, and I thought, well, I should have known that. This is Washington, right? But I got a problem. This is not going to work. This won't work at all. $20 or 30 minutes, huh? Okay. I have to start by talking about the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers indeed did a historic accomplishment 112 years ago. But if you read history, or if you read what the media tends to say about them, I found that even a long time ago they don't do fact-checking. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Wright brothers. The things that you think they did that were not really true. You've probably seen hundreds of places where they say that, oh, the first Wright brothers flight is 120 feet. That's not true. The Wright brothers were smart guys. In fact, what they did up until the point that they decided to limit other people from flying three-axis airplanes, what they did was very much the same kind of approach that I've done when I'm developing model airplanes or home-built airplanes or our prototypes that scaled. Wonderful, wonderful inventive approaches. They developed their own propellers. They did wind tunnel testing on little contraptions, kind of like I did. They did some really cool stuff. But when Orville flew that first flight, and John Daniels, who was just somebody standing around, took that picture, you know, that iconic picture with Wilbur standing there like this, and it's off the ground? That was a 12-second flight that went 120 feet before it crashed. They didn't call that a demonstration of sustained controlled flight at all. It was damaged. What did they do? Did they quit and go home? No, they fixed it. And Wilbur this time got in the airplane. And he flew another flight. And just like the first one, these guys had a problem because they had an unstable airplane and they had no time at all in type. The only guy that had time in type was Orville, 12 seconds. And they went and chose a different pilot who had 0 time in type to fly the second flight. And Wilbur did the same thing. Whoa, 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 bash, he crashed. He got 175 feet. And they agreed, didn't even argue or debate it, it was a failure. On the third flight that day, Orville was back in the cockpit. Wilbur actually took a photo of that himself. I've never seen that photo. Have you? If anybody has that photo, I'd love to have it. Now that I've got the Wright trophy, maybe I can get somebody to send me that photo. Now he had only a few seconds in flight, and he crashed also. The fourth flight, now Wilbur is in the airplane, not Orville. You thought that Orville Wright flew the first flight of the airplane. Well, the definition of first powered flight was something that was sustainable, controllable, and what was the other words? Controlled and sustained, okay? The fourth flight was controlled and sustained. Wilbur he's now flying his second flight, so he's got more time in type. He flew that airplane for 59 seconds, and he flew at 852 feet into a pretty strong headwind, and it was probably about 1,200 or 1,300 feet through the air. And they had the right to claim that they had the first airplane that was sustainable and controllable, powered airplane. That's the other word I was looking for, powered. Of course, everybody knows it was damaged by a gust of wind and never flew again. Just as an anecdote, let's fast forward exactly 100 years into the future. Was anybody at Kitty Hawk that day that's in the audience? Weren't you kind of embarrassed? 100 years of technology development. They go out and copy this airplane. How far did it fly? People that were there, tell me. Huh? Not at all. I think it's about 3 or 4 feet. Did they jump in there and fix it and fly it again? Try to fly it again? No. I think they assigned a safety review board. There were a lot of people there, for God's sake. There was international media there. And they sent the media home saying that we don't know how to fly this airplane, and we have proven by what you've seen today that the Wright brothers probably didn't fly 100 years ago. They didn't say that, but they certainly demonstrated it. Hell, if Scaled Composites had built that, we would have pulled off the power and landed in 852 feet with a controlled landing because we would have tested it before. Well, I'll tell you what we did that day. Does anybody in the audience know what Scaled Composites did on the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers' flight? Nobody? You're kidding. All the media was at Kitty Hawk? You're kidding. Come on, one person, yell out what we did. My wife. You're not, you can't. Our Spaceship One program was 3.5 years. We developed a manned space program from scratch, developed our own rocket motor. We went out to a couple of vendors for things like valves and injectors, but we developed the rocket motor for that airplane. We developed our own B-52. I mean, it's an X-15-like program. We had to build the launch airplane, so we made our own B-52. We developed a rocket test facility. We flew a flight test program on that launch airplane and on the spaceship, and we built our own simulator, and we did that whole works with an average of less than 40, 45 people for that 3.5-year time period. And it was all done with one check from Paul Allen, and he says, I want to do this. I want to be part of your possible success. The program was not brought out of the covert arena until it was essentially ready to fly. And a few months later, on the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers' flight, Spaceship One at 50,000 feet dropped off from White Knight 1 and for the first time fired a rocket motor. It had done just glides before. And 15 seconds later, it was at Mach 1.2, straight flying up like this. And it was the first time ever that a non-prime aerospace company had built and flown a supersonic airplane. And I thought that was a big milestone. And nobody here knows about it. You know why you don't know about it? My customer, Paul Allen, even when we did that, did not come forward and say, I'm the funding source for this. He stayed in the shadows. Isn't that weird? Especially compared to Sir Richard Branson. He doesn't stay in the shadows. It's weird. I've worked with a couple of billionaires, and they're absolutely polar opposites. They're both wonderful people, by the way. And somebody who, when you first look him in the face, I've talked to Paul Allen quite a bit before that, years, about things like telecommunications or about having an airplane that can circle over large cities and get broadband on demand. This is before fiber in the ground. And the next meeting I had with Paul was after I had sorted out the solution to this thing that killed Mike Adams in the X-15, and that is the need to carefully control angle of attack and side slip during reentry. And Mike, for a number of reasons, wasn't able to do that, and it broke up, and he lost his life. The only fatality in the X-15 program in 199 flights. That haunted me because Mike Adams was a friend of mine. I was working at Edwards then. And when I looked at doing a suborbital thing that was going to fly the public, I wanted a solution for that failure. Because the X-15 and the shuttle have to be carefully controlled within a range of just 3 or 4 degrees, a couple of 3 degrees, during reentry, or they'll have an accident. So I challenged myself with making something you could throw at the atmosphere upside down or tumbling, and the pilot could eat lunch during reentry. And oh, by the way, there's no electronic flight control system, not even a yaw damper in Spaceship One. He just sits there. And the feathered Spaceship One, which is displayed now in the feathered condition. If you haven't been to the Air and Space Museum for a few months, go back over and look at it. It's in feathered now. In that configuration, you can throw it at the atmosphere, straight down, whereas the X-15 had to go less than 40 degrees or it would break up. And it straightens itself out and does a safe reentry. That was the breakthrough that I thought needed to be done in order to enable something that's safe enough for someone to start a space tourism business. I remain skeptical that you can have orbital space tourism unless we have some breakthroughs that will solve two problems. One, it's too expensive. And two, going to orbit statistically is too dangerous for the public. Almost 4% of the people that have done that have died. It's only 4 accidents, but 4%. You don't start an airline by killing 4% of your passengers. So I thought that was an important thing to do, and that's probably the most significant thing about Spaceship One. At talks that I give nowadays, my only job now is I occasionally go off and give a talk on managing creative people, building an environment, doing things like Kelly Johnson did. What do you do to build an environment so that people that work for you can have breakthroughs? Things like, you can't have a breakthrough at all if you're doing development. You have to do research to have a breakthrough, right? I define research as when half the folk at least think it's impossible. Just like the folk working Apollo. If you put them in a room and say, what's your net worth? Would you bet all of it? Doors closed now. Would you bet all of it that we'll actually fly to the moon and back before 1970? You would have gotten a minority of people, not a majority, that said it was possible, because they wouldn't bet their own money on it. Apollo was a research program. I would love to see my taxpayer dollars in a government program that has the courage to do real research. And I'm troubled by that. Because you're not going to have breakthroughs, you're not going to have something a lot better than you have, and you're not going to solve the problem of cost or safety by just taking the lowest risk approach from what has been done. Anyway, I talk about inspiration. Aviation Week asked me on the 100th anniversary of of Wright Brothers flight, which was 12 years ago. They said, I want you to write an article, Mr. Rutan, for us, and I want you to identify the movers and shakers of the first 100 years of aerospace that has influenced you the most. Who is the real breakthrough folk, people? And also, we want you to predict the next 100 years. Well, of course, I refused to do the second, but I gave them a list. Came up with 9 people. They printed an Aviation Week, I think, in January of 2004, maybe just after the Wright Brothers' 100th year anniversary. People like Kelly Johnson, von Braun, Lindbergh, Northrop, Ed Heidemann, Howard Hughes I had on the list. And after I had given talks on inspiration, where I had this hunch that the reason that I went out and did some things which might not look possible as an adult, I think it's because as a kid I saw a lot happen. And it made me think that hard things are possible. Like, for example, this world developed 9 different space launch systems, not capsules, but boosters, in 9 years in the 60s. By the way, I will bet that almost nobody in this audience can do it. I challenged the NASA administrator sitting next to me. And he couldn't name them. Isn't that right? You couldn't name them. Do you agree with me now? There were 9? America developed 7 of the 9 and didn't injure an astronaut. That was cool. We took a hell of a risk and still didn't kill anybody. Wow. But I discovered something. Every one of the people on my list, all 9 of them, were kids between the ages of 4 and teenage during this wonderful time between the time when Wilbur Wright flew in Paris and the next 4 or 6 years or so. Now, the reason it's important that Wilbur flew in Paris is the Europeans didn't believe the Wrights. They looked at that picture, and there was only one picture. It's got Orville standing there, and the airplane's in the air, sure. Actually, it was a flight that was only 12 seconds long. So they were right to be skeptical, and they thought that picture was photoshopped. The Europeans did not believe the Wrights. But within 4 years, by 1912, there were airplanes flying, new types, in 39 countries, and they didn't have the internet. Can you believe 39 countries in the world had airplanes flying within 4 years of the time that Wright went to Paris and convinced the Europeans that he actually had flown? And you know why? What if the Wright brothers had been a multi-million-dollar funded research company and did that accomplishment of that 59-second, 852-foot flight? How many people would say that I can do that? Well, no, I don't have millions of dollars. The Wrights came out of a bicycle shop. A bicycle shop. Glenn Curtis had a motorcycle shop. And the fact that the Wrights came out of a bicycle shop and flew the first powered, sustained, controlled flight, the entire world figured out something. And that is, I can do it. Exactly. I can do that. And there were arguably tens of thousands of projects trying to fly airplanes. Right? The airplane was invented by natural selection. Those that wouldn't get off the ground, the species doesn't survive. Those that got off the ground and killed the pilot, don't make another one. Think about it. If you go out and try, and you don't have equations, you can't get a book on airplane design. And when you fly it, you can't take flying lessons. If you survive the first flight, the airplane has good flying qualities by definition that you survived. Because you couldn't have been trained. Isn't that cool? And in 4 years, after Wilbur flew at Paris, some wonderful things happened. In fact, last year, I gave a talk at Airbus in Toulouse. I know, it's the enemy. And I got a kick about asking them why you're letting people fly in airplanes that you can brake with your feet with 18 pounds of rudder pedal below the maneuvering speed. No, ask them that. It was a annual big deal where they bring everybody in from all the countries that are Airbus involved. And it's weird. They all speak English. And they're from all these companies, and they have to speak English, And I got to have lunch with their flight test manager and so on. And they took me to where I gave a talk in a building that was an airplane factory in 1912 that built 500 airplanes that year. Wow. The building where they built 500 airplanes in 1912, 4 years after Wilbur flew in Paris. And what the hell have we done in 4 years? Isn't it embarrassing? I mean, it was amazing. I've tried to get Boeing to have me come in and talk. And they're still debating whether I should tear up the papers. But I told them, hey, I'm an American. I'll be very complimentary to you guys compared to Airbus. That's for damn sure. But I don't know. Maybe they can't afford me. Okay, let's look at my inspiration. Why I went out and made a decision when my own employees whispered that I'm crazy. I had a company with just, what was it? Kevin, you're in the audience. How many people did we have in 2000 or 2001? Was it 80 or 90? 90, we had 90 people in the company. On a company that throughout the 80s and 90s, in order to make a first flight of a new type every year, you walk into my shop and we're building in various stages between 4 and 7 research airplanes. Some just getting started, building toolings, some being prepared for flight test. We had 3 or 4 airplanes in flight test for most of the time. Company less than 100 people. Nah, impossible. I don't believe it. I sometimes pinch myself and say, how in the hell did we do that? I've been retired too long, I guess. I was inspired to take those risks, I think, by what happened when I was a kid in that age group. When I was 12, we didn't have television. We went over to another town to some friends that had television. And I watched Wernher von Braun and Walt Disney show models of things that Wernher had designed that will go to Mars. Take 139 people to Mars. And I'll tell you something, Mars was a hell of a lot more interesting place in 1955 than it is now. The goddamn NASA has landed only... They landed only in the desert. And as soon as I saw those pictures, I thought, well, hell, we're not going there. It looks just like Mojave. I remember being at JPL. What was your impression when you got those first pictures of the Viking lander? I'm not sure this is Viking. It might have been another deal. You know, your memory isn't totally good, but you know, wasn't that cool? Okay, now everybody was jumping up and down, right? What an accomplishment. Our computers are little wires going through little magnets, you know. And yet we soft landed and took pictures on the surface of another planet. Wow. But something puzzled me is the damn geologists were jumping up and down with excitement too. And I can see why the engineers were excited. They did something that was damn near impossible. You could argue that it was impossible with what they had to work from, and they pulled it off. But the geologists were all excited. Now keep in mind, what I'm about to say may piss some people off, but I'm an engineer, I'm an airplane designer, so just kind of paint that picture. I took a piece of paper, a blank sheet of paper, and I slid it across the table with a pencil to the geologist, and I says, I dare you to draw something on that piece of paper that's more boring than what we see coming from Mars. I could sketch something that was more exciting. A fossil. A rock that is not on Earth. A plant. A scientist. But you guys are screwing it up because we don't want to go now because now, first of all, I'm not saying there's nothing there. There are a bunch of oceans in the solar system. The Earth is the only one that's at the surface. You need to be looking there because that's probably the only place we're going to find scientists. Or I don't know. It's discouraging. I was very excited about it as a kid. Okay, I was really excited as a kid because the missile age started, the jet age started. The speed that you could fly by buying a ticket went way up. The speed of the fastest military fighter went way up. And the speed of the fastest research airplane went way, way up. It all happened when I was a kid of that little 8 or 10 year time period. And I think watching that happen inspired me to go out and try things. And again, I had to have confidence in nonsense. And what is meant by that? Think of the biggest breakthrough you can think of. Got it? Ask yourself, before it was considered a breakthrough, it was probably, oh, that's nonsense. Right? That's why only the weird wacko guys like me have breakthroughs, because we have to have confidence in nonsense, or we don't even try. And if you do something, I laud the people that do development. Look what Boeing has done for this country with their airliners. It's phenomenal. I almost refuse to ride it. No, I won't get into that. But development is wonderful, but if you're going to have breakthroughs, you've got to try nonsensical things and stick to them even if they don't work the first time. So that's one of my kind of guidelines that I try to encourage people to try. Okay, I'm going to do a little thought experiment. I'm going to pretend that I was born exactly 50 years before I was born. And then I'm going to guess what inspired me if I had been born 50 years earlier. I told you what inspired me when I was born in 1943. But if I was born in 1893, what inspired me? Well, I'd have been 10 years old when the Wright brothers flew. Wow, that's cool. I don't know if it was in Popular Mechanics then or not, but, I'm sure that Photoshop picture, I'm sure that picture was there. I wish they'd have taken a good video of the whole, no, that they didn't. When I was 15, Wilbur Wright flew in Paris. And you know the amazing thing? All the way from when I was 10 until I was no longer a teenager, this 9-year time period, I would not have been mostly inspired by the Wright brothers. First of all, the Wrights didn't let anybody watch them for a while. And then the Wrights also patented things and tried to get money from anybody else who tried to fly with 3-axis control. I don't think I would have been excited about that. I think I would have been a lot more inspired by what Glenn Curtiss did. He's out there developing seaplanes. He's out there trying new stuff. Of course, if you have a motorcycle company, you got better engines than a bicycle company. A real significant thing, while I was still a teenager, Glenn Curtiss had on his mantle 2 Collier trophies. Wow. I did a little research and I found out there's only 3 people that have gotten 2 Collier trophies for individual accomplishments. You know, if Boeing gets it 3 times and you work for Boeing, that's not the same as doing it for your individual accomplishment. Glenn Curtiss. And the second one was my hero, Kelly Johnson. And I am as proud as I can be of anything that in my museum at home, I have 2 Collier trophies. I'm the only guy alive that has that. Now, a little anecdote. I didn't know it at the time, but when you get the Collier trophy, NAA doesn't have a lot of money, so they want you to pay for the dinner and the trophy replica, right? Well, the Voyager folk didn't have any money. I think they got a sponsor to pay for the chicken or the dinner, right? But my Collier replica for the Voyager flight is made out of plaster, and it's painted gold, right? And on the other side of my mantle, my customer was worth $26 billion. So my trophy on the other side of the mantle for the Collier looks exactly like that 500-pound one in the Smithsonian that I looked at this morning. It's a replica of that, the same materials. You know, it's bronze and it's beautiful wood, and it's, you know, it just doesn't look like the same trophy. It's kind of interesting. But I was going to say something else about that, but maybe it's on the floor here. Okay, I'm going to close a little bit by talking about some retirement things. I was kind of burned out at Scaled. In fact, didn't do very much in the last 4 years. I had some pretty serious health problems starting about 4 years before I retired. I regained some of that health back, and then the last 4 months, I worked my ass off trying to fly a new airplane before I retired, and it flew the day before I retired. But I'll tell you, I was so tired and so burned out. And I got in a car to drive up to my new home up in North Idaho. And I didn't want to do anything at all again with airplanes. I can remember Tanya driving away. We didn't even look at the rearview mirror to watch Mojave disappear. I had lived there for 46 years. I had worked there very hard. You know, during the Vietnam War, every program I worked on was O1A priority. I was working on sending telegrams out for the siege of Khe Sanh to let them do a LAPS test with a C-130 so they could save our troops. And boy, I tell you, you work very hard when you do that. Long hours. And then when you become an entrepreneur, you really work hard. I thought it caught up with me, and I thought I'd never, ever do anything else but put my feet up and continue to learn to play golf. I moved to a place that I need to say a couple of things about, because It's a place where your neighbors, America, to them is a lot like it was a lot earlier, when we were proud that we were an exceptional country. Very proud. My neighbors are the type of folk, keep in mind they're all new friends. I didn't have any friends or relatives up there. They're the kind of folk, if they call you on the phone and get the wrong number, they'll talk to you for 5 minutes. And this actually happened to me twice. I'm in the Home Depot trying to find something, and somebody comes up and helps me find it. And then I find out that that person doesn't work for Home Depot. And another thing that blew me away, and there is places like this in America, I shouldn't tell you where it is because I don't really want you to move there, especially the lawyers. But you know, up there, if a stranger waves at you, he'll use his entire hand. Driving away to my new home, I asked myself, by the way, that's a 20-hour drive. I asked myself, what did I really accomplish? Because I knew I was done. I'd never do anything else again, except put my feet up. What did I do that was important? And I listed that the number 4 thing was Spaceship One, and the number 5 thing was Voyager. Before I thought about it, and while it happened, particularly in 2004 with Spaceship One, when our flight, according to the criteria of the number of world newspapers that cover it above the fold on their newspaper, Spaceship One was the number 2 story of 2004. World newspaper above the fold coverage. If they hadn't pulled Saddam Hussein out of his spider hole, we'd have been number 1. I think, though, that the number 3 thing, more important than those, because those were just other programs. They weren't necessarily hard. In fact, I'm finding that this little seaplane is harder now. Maybe I'm just not as good, but I'm finding it to be harder than those airplanes. I made a lot of mistakes. But I think the number 3 thing that I did that was important in those 46 years at the high desert, the one without palm trees, is just the pretty much quantity. The fact that I was able to put a small company together and somehow motivate people to work as hard as I worked, because I emphasize fun as number 1, fun for their families as number 2. In other words, you pay them well, better health care than Lockheed, that's fun for the family. And number 3, my company was owned by 5 different equity holders in the 30 years of Scaled Composites while I was there. I had no hesitance to look my equity owner in the face and say, profitability here is the 3rd priority. Fun for employees, fun for their families is 1 and 2. The fact that we had so much fun meant people worked very hard, and that meant that I had more fun because we had the most fun thing you can have at an airport, and that is to watch a first flight of a new type. We got to do that every year on the average. How many people here I watched the first flight of an entirely new type. What was it? What was the airplane? Which one? No, you didn't see the first flight of spaceship. No, you saw... You saw the 17th flight of Spaceship One. You didn't see the first flight. How many here have seen Dr. Bolden? Good answer. You probably watched the Enterprise do the glide test, and you watched also John Young. Wasn't that fun? That was awesome. Good answer. A lot of people say, well, I watched the first flight of the 720. I says, did you watch the first flight of the 707? No. Well, wait a minute, they look the same. You know what I'm getting at, though? When you go out there with a new airplane and tell everybody that you know exactly how it's going to fly on its first flight, you're lying. So anyway, that was the thing that I thought was number 3 that I'm proud of. And that is the fact that we had such a high volume of doing those number over a 40-year time period and never injured a test pilot. And that's something I'm very proud of. The number 2 thing on my list that I'm proud of is something that I never even thought about until I was on the road driving north and all done. And Tanya probably remembers this. I said to her, you know, Tanya, back there in Mojave, there's 400 people at work today. They're associated with 400 families. And in a world where half of the people don't pay any taxes, every one of those 400 families pays taxes. Now, when the government goes out and says, oh, we created jobs, well, they create a job that I as a taxpayer pays for. That's a burden on me. That brings me down so I don't have the money to do research, have breakthroughs, and make America exceptional. But what I was able to do, those 400 jobs wouldn't exist at all if I hadn't decided to have fun. And I am absolutely proud of the fact that by creating 400 tax-paying families, I reduced the burden on the taxpayers of the country. And I think that was important. The number 1 most important thing to me was something that I can't talk about tonight. I hope to be able to talk about it while I'm still alive. But the number 1 most important thing that I thought of driving north in retirement was the work that I and my company was able to do to help this country's national security. And the people at Scale, and certainly the people that retire and get a chance to think of what did they do that was important, they know that that's a very proud accomplishment. And I hope to be able to reveal more of that stuff to you before I die, or at least my kids will. But I got to thinking, you know, that is more important than Spaceship One. Like I said, I retired with the intention of doing nothing, and I was a failure at retirement. Because after a while, I said, no, I got to have one more airplane. And it didn't fly as advertised at first. not off of water or off the runways, and I've got a lot of work to do, but I'm going to hopefully solve these problems. I'm going to tell you I'm not going to quit, and I'm hopeful of having something that's a breakthrough in nature for exploration. And it's a question mark now. I don't know if it'll work, but I'm going to work hard to try to make it work. And the message in closing, I'm going to read this. I hate to read things to wonderful audiences like this, but I want to get this right. My recommendation to you is have the courage to turn your visions into realities that help America restore its exceptionalism, and you have fun in the process. Thank you.